that's like the ultimate prize, is that knowing thyself, right? Is finding that way of walking in the world is greater than any sort of thing that the world could give you. And yet at the same time, that can all be given to you when you're that thing, but it doesn't matter to you anymore. Like that really is the key to the whole thing, is that like none of that shit even matters.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. All right, everybody, welcome. This is part 2. We're continuing this off of our last one, our Artist Wisdom series, where we were looking at the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. And we were looking at a specific sort of sentence from the last one. And now we're going to dive into a bit more of the poem, because it's a long poem. And I'm going to read it through. I'll give a quick read of the whole poem, just so you can have another frame of it if you didn't hear the last episode. So it goes like this. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you, except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. All right. Man, every time I read this poem, it's like there's something else that just jumps out at me, right? There's something that's just kind of, that just provokes something, like that there's a bit more to it than I'd maybe initially thought there was, which is part of what I love about doing this. And I think it's a good practice to like sometimes take a great piece of writing, you know, because like I think that most of us can recognize when there's some piece of really truly inspired writing that's got a lot going on in it, is to like really slow down and just spend time with it and explore it. You know, it's not about trying to find like, this is the right interpretation of it or the wrong interpretation of it. I think that great writing has like, it has almost a life of its own, you know, like where it's like, yeah, like that's true about it. And yeah, that's true about it too. And this is true about it too. Like it is saying all of these things, right? And without necessarily directly saying it, like it's come with its, you know, hands full, you know, like with like just bags of stuff along with it. So, you know, there was something that I thought that I wanted to dive into in here, like one of the terms, but then I saw something else in here that just really kind of shot out at me a little bit. And I was saying, oh, that's an interesting one. Anyhow, I think that let's dive into, because I think the one that you wanted to get into was the part that goes, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim. I mean, that's an interesting one, in like particularly the dream part. I find interesting because we are such a culture of like, follow your dreams, your dreams, your dreams, your dreams, and hey, look, follow your dreams is there's a beautiful sentiment that's going on there. I've maybe replaced it in my own life with the sort of Joseph Campbell version of like, follow your bliss, because there's a different kind of quality to that thing. Because I think sometimes our dreams are often filled with the propaganda of others. But there's something interesting about kind of tearing down this whole idea of our dreams. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to pass it over to you, because this was sort of the one that was calling out to you, and I want to hear what you have to say.
It's interesting that you bring this up about dreams being filled with propaganda of someone else's idea of what a dream is. And I think that's very true. And I do think that there is a hijacking that occurs with what often starts out as a good and pure thing. And it actually kind of comes back to your quote of like watching your words get twisted by fools, which is the other part, which, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. I feel like that is what you're implying about the dreams idea. So I often use the word vision instead of dreams now, because to me, a lot of things do come to me in vision. I see it, and then I begin to work with it. It's my probably strongest form of learning is by seeing it, and then I like to actually do it and get hands-on. Some people, that's not how they work, right? You mentioned something about it being a calling. I've begun to embrace that a lot more, because it sometimes breaks me away from my own trap of always having it be like seen as this vision, where it's more like I don't see it yet, but I know the direction I need to go, and it's calling me out there. And so I can hear it. And so I'm going towards it. And that can be helpful for me just in my interpretation of what we might call quote unquote dreams. But I do think that people, when they often say like, follow your dreams, I think these days, particularly in our culture, in Western culture, it's manipulated and propagandized with follow your dreams, become a big success and get all this material shit, and then you're going to be somebody. It's like, yeah, but like, would that really be your dream if that wasn't based on your culture's propaganda of what it meant? And this goes back to our previous conversation about victory and disaster, or triumph and disaster, which is that if your triumph and disaster is based on the propaganda of other people's version of what achieving your dreams are, then you're going to be thinking your triumphs are, oh, like my triumph is I made all this money, or I got this car, or whatever. So I do think that there's a interesting thing. So let me go back to the quote that stood out to me, which was, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim. Now, this is, again, I warned about this in our last episode at the beginning. Interpretation is a dangerous territory to come in and step in and say, hey, this is it. There's another quote before I get into what I'm about to say. This also stands out to me. And yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. That one's always stood out to me, because I do feel like a lot of what our dreams are made of is looking good and being wise and all that type of shit. Like, we want to look good. And I think that if your dream is based on looking good to other people, you're not in your dream, you're in your propaganda of what a dream is. So if you can dream, meaning that and this is interpretation again, I don't want to talk too wise, like I know, but I think what I've kind of worked out, at least at this point, is my dream is more like I have these inclinations, maybe callings, but images or something. And I go, I don't know. Like that just seems so cool. I want that. I want to go there. I want to see that. I want to be in that. I want to experience that. I want to do that. And so I think when you get these dreams, I don't think that they always are about getting there. I think those things often get you going in the direction you need to go. And that's why I love this saying, don't make dreams your master. So you have this image or this idea or this vision of yourself becoming something. Maybe, for example, let's just use this one, a famous actor walking down the red carpet, accepting their trophy, their Oscar, whatever it might be. If you make that your master, now you've lost sight of the whole thing, which is the acting and the experience of that and all of that. That image might drive you to really push yourself to be a great actor and do a great performance. But I think that it becomes misguided. Then I think the thinking is kind of about the critical thing. It's like one thing I learned through philosophy, and this was profound. When I had this shift, it changed everything for me. When I went into philosophy, I was looking for answers. When I left philosophy, I only had more questions. And that's how I knew I learned philosophy. Philosophy is about teaching you to think. It's about teaching you to ask questions. And what you find is one question leads to 3 more better questions. And those 3 questions lead to 9 more even better, deeper, more profound questions. And if you can be okay with that, that's actual wisdom. The person looking for answers is actually the naive fool who's ignorant and lost. So when it says, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, I think what he's saying, in my interpretation, again, don't make answers your aim. Make the thinking a part of what you do, but don't make your aim to answer all the questions you have. Part of life is having the questions.
Yeah, it makes me think of that other quote, famous quote by a famous writer. Who I can't think, it was like, but live the questions. Like where did we do that one on the artist? I don't know if we've done that.
We made an episode called Live the Questions.
Oh, well, I mean, I know, so I think I know who you were talking about, but there's like a famous quote by, so it wasn't our guest, but there was a famous quote where it's that has this sentiment of like, ask the questions, but don't be so concerned about finding the answers, right? And it's like, live the questions, and maybe someday you will live into the answers, right? And it's and yeah, like I think that the whole thing of like, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, yeah, it also makes me think about a great thing I've heard from Alan Watts, which is just like, if all you think about is your thoughts, like then, or unless you take a break from just thinking thoughts, you'll have nothing new to think about. Right? Like it's such a thought is such a circular thing, and you need to have new experiences. You need to move into spaces that are beyond thought in order for thought to have new subject, right? A new subject matter. And so it's like there's this sort of like making thoughts your aim is sort of a closure to life experience, right? And yeah, we definitely, there's a lot in our modern day society and culture that I think that speaks to, because so many people are just trying to, as you're saying, think of what is the way that's going to make them sound right. How do you score sort of intellectual points out there in the world? And there's, I think that we can see that how insidious of a game that becomes. It actually becomes very malicious. I find, like, you just have people just trying to out clever each other about things, talking about ideas all the time, and meanwhile everything's fucking burning all around, right? And it's just like there's another place where we can meet, like my favorite poem by Rumi. It's like, beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there, right? Like there's another ground to which we can connect as human beings. I wanted to just also come back to what the whole part about dreaming in the sense that, because he's not saying that dreams are a bad thing, not at all. Like, in fact, he's saying if you can dream, right? If you can dream and not make dreams your master, right? So like he's also saying that there's a value to it, right? There are values, is a value to your dreams, right? And that there needs to be some recognition of them and the directions that they might point us to, but also not getting hung up on them. Like, don't get too hung up on this thing. Don't make it sort of the thing that you worship above all other things, because I think, again, that's, it's like that utopia becoming a dystopia kind of idea, because like our dreams are often very utopian in their conceptualization, right? It's like, oh, like if there's this dream and I'm going to do that and then it'll make this happen, it'll blah, blah, and it's all just, sunshine and rainbows the whole time. And it's like, in that pursuit, you can often do a whole shit ton of damage, or the things that you have to do in order to make that thing happen means doing something pretty horrible, right? Like if you just a very simple look at anyone with like a literal utopian vision for the world, right? Where there's all of these high ideals, it's like, and people will live like this, and then everyone will do this, and this is how it'll all be, and people will, like, this whole grand vision of what the world will be like, and blah, 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 blah. Well, but again, you don't know enough. Going back to like our last episode, it's like, well, how do you know, right? Like we have such limited scope, and we only have our perspective, right? And so what ends up happening is that if you actually have the power to start trying to implement that vision, is it will eventually start to become more and more violent, because you're inevitably going to run into people who disagree with some of what that vision is that you have, and say like, well, hang on a second, like there's all of these problems with, or they might have an issue, whether it has good founding or not, but you will meet people who have a problem with certain things. And so what do you do with those people? You might start by reasoning with them, but eventually someone's like, no, they won't be convinced of your perspective. So then what? Because these people are holding up this vision that you have, right? And it's like, okay, well, we need to get a little more forceful. So now maybe we'll take some of your rights away, right? We're going to punish you somehow. Oh, now the utopia is already starting to fall apart, because now you have two different tiers of society that you're creating. And what if they still don't go along and agree with you? Well, now you're going to what? You're going to start locking these people up. And maybe you even start, like, the farthest you go, these people are now being killed, and your utopia is now full on dystopia, right? So that's like that's that whole nutshell. The dream can be the same type of thing, right? Where it's like, it has to, your dreams have to come up and interact with the world, right? They're in relationship to the world, and it might be a little bit more messy, a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more unpredictable, but it's actually the thing that you want, right? Because that interaction with the world is where actualization happens, right? And when you can bring in other people's ideas, other people's perspectives into it, you can actually enrich the thing, because there might be things that you didn't even think of, some beautiful thing that like is better than the idea that you had, right? It doesn't make you less than. I think it's like part of like where the ego kind of stuff steps in here. But other people can just bring so much into that dream and take you way beyond what you had initially thought. And so it's not always comfortable to have that take on it, but I think that's another part of what he's saying to this thing is not only is can you end up creating a nightmare out of your dream, but also your dream can be made better if it's open.
Good stuff, man. I think one thing about dreams is, just because you have a dream doesn't mean that it's always going to be good. I do think that things can turn to a nightmare. That's something I explore a lot. I've been very fascinated with exploring in story is the utopia and dystopia worlds. They've always fascinated me, and I found them quite interesting. But they say all dystopias start out of utopian principles. In other words, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think that one thing that people are consistently they don't know how to deal with very well is power. And there's absolute power corrupts absolutely. There's a certain amount of truth to that. You take somebody, it starts off like this, right? You take somebody who is weak or bullied or whatever, and they just want to get their power back, and then they get their power back, but now they have the ability to do things that they didn't have before, and they're angry about being a victim or being abused or bullied before or whatever, and so now they feel righteous and taking it out on the people that reflected that type of aspect that they experienced when they were vulnerable. And if it's unchecked, it becomes corrupted, and you take what was somewhat seemingly innocent good, and it becomes a rotten evil, horrible, horrible thing. And there's a saying, and I think this saying is very relevant always to keep in mind, is that hurt people. So if you don't heal yourself, you will inevitably hurt people with your hurt. And it's whether you'll do it consciously or unconsciously, you probably will do it. And I think one of the biggest things is that, as we work our way through the world, we have to, if we ever want to have anything that we really want, we need to begin to realize how powerful we actually are. And that just doesn't mean in the power to actually acquire what we want or get what we want or achieve what we want or do any of that, but that once we do achieve it and get it and acquire it, that will we know how to handle it? And it's a similar metaphor to, would you put a knife in the hands of a child? And at what stage would it be okay to give them something in which they could hurt themselves or hurt someone else without realizing that they're doing it? Before, so there's a certain amount of care, right? So I do think that in what we're talking about, we are like, as we're exploring this, there's a certain amount of, you need disaster, you need some of the pains in the world, you need some of these things in the world, because if you were to get everything you wanted, all the triumphs, all the victories, all the, no one ever doubted you, no one ever challenged you, all of this, it just always went your way. Where would you build your empathy? Where would you build your character? How would you get any of the qualities that we so admire in a human life? And the thing is you wouldn't, because there is no way to get them without the alternative things. So I think part of the poem explores the idea of that you're going to have to experience people talking poorly about you. You're going to experience people twisting your words. You're going to experience disaster. You're going to experience all this stuff. And if you can handle it, if you can do so gracefully and with care and with mindfulness, you can have the things you want. But if you're not able to handle these things, which will inevitably come, and I like to call them, the valleys, the peaks and the valleys, but I like to think of them as the valleys. If you can't walk through the valley, you'll never get to experience the peak. And if, God forbid, you did get to experience the peak without the valley, you might be a very dangerous person. You might be a very dangerous person without even knowing it. And I think that, there's a lot of things to explore with, our human journey is not always it's not always easy. It's difficult. It's there's all sorts of things that come along with it that we don't wish upon each other, and we, in a lot of ways, with our utopian ideas, we want to protect everybody from. But it's like the whole idea of the helicopter parent. If you don't know what that is, it's the parent that's always helicoptering around their child and always protecting them from any form of adversity or difficulty, or ever stubbing their toe or bumping their knee. And then what you do is you have a child that grows up to be an adult invalid. They are dependent and reliant on someone else to protect them all the time, because they've never bumped into the world and they've never had any pain, and the slightest bit of discomfort and they're absolutely shot down, useless. And it's at the same time, though, we don't want you to be so abused and so destroyed and so harmed and hurt in your innocence that you just have no fight in you and nothing seems possible, and you have no hope and optimism about the world because you were so traumatized and beaten down. And we're always trying to navigate this experience, but I don't think it ends in childhood. I think it carries on through adulthood and even up until we're elders. And maybe you lose your youth, maybe you lose your beauty, maybe you lose your health, whatever it might be. These things are your adversity, which in some ways are going to make you into who you need to be. And so I think, like, what's interesting about this poem, and I just keep going back to it, and I've loved it ever since I heard it when I was about 14 or 15 years old, which is like, this is a way to, it's almost a filtering process. You're going to experience disaster. You're going to experience triumph. If you get too caught up in triumph, you're going to get misled. If you get too caught up in disaster, you're going to get misled. If you make dreams your master, you're going to get misled. But dream, but don't make them your master. If you think that's good, you're critical, you're pondering, but don't make it all about thinking, because now you'll never do anything. Now you'll get caught up in the what could go wrong and all of that other stuff, right? So to me, a lot of what we're talking about today and exploring this wisdom is about finding a balance. Everything, it's like, if you can do this, but not too much of that. Mm-hmm. If you can do this, but not too much of that. Or if you can navigate this way and not that way, you're going to be okay. And it's about balance and alignment. I feel like that's a lot about what we're talking about today.
Yeah, there's, it's interesting because this is almost, I realize as well, this poem, it's like, it's almost issuing a challenge as well. Because this isn't an easy thing that he's asking of the reader. This is some pretty lofty stuff, but it's all things that are about the person that you are, right? As opposed to, because like there's no, if you can be a big deal and stay on top, it's that's not the picture that he's painting here. Like he's saying, like, yeah, if you can be success and then lose it all and be totally fine and you know what, and not even tell anybody about what you lost. Like if there's he says, I think in the last sort of frame, like if you can walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, right? If you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, yeah. There's these things, like if you can occupy these spaces, but retain some part of you, right? And at the end of it, I thought that this was something that's maybe worth exploring as well. But in the end, he says, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. Right? And it's like, that's a compelling thing, because I think that one of the easy places to go is thinking like, oh, you can just have it all, right? If you're like this, right? If you're like this, you can just, and there's a lot of material things that immediately come to mind, but I think that's almost like he's been warning you about that trap this whole way through, where it's like, that's not what he's promising, right? He's like, there's something about the freedom to be who you are, right? Like that's the earth and everything that's in it, right? Because the way that you walk, the way that you live is not based upon any sort of ego type of thing and of acquisition, prestige, whatever it is. It's your life is about something bigger than that, right? And when you're in that place, then the world is yours no matter what place you find yourself in materially, whether you have nothing in the bank or you got, everything in the bank, right? Like it's kind of saying this has got nothing to do with it. The earth is yours because you're free. You're free from, as the word that we've been using a lot, propaganda of others and of the world. You're free of people's hate, of people's lies, even if it's about you. Like you're just it just doesn't have a place to land within you, right? Like it's unaffecting to you. And I mean, and then at the end he says, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son, right? That's more than the earth, right? That's another fascinating thing about how this ends. Like yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, right? Like that's the greatest thing that you come away with after all of this. Like everything in the earth is actually secondary to the person that you are, right? I know that it said, it's like, you'll be a man, my son. There's that sort of masculine, male element that it finishes with, which makes me think that he probably wrote this for his son, probably. But I don't think that that's necessarily so relevant to this, because it's really about you becoming that genuine, real, authentic, integral human being who honors their nature above all else, right? Who lives from a different point of view, right? And that's like the ultimate prize, is that knowing thyself, right? Is finding that way of walking in the world is greater than any sort of thing that the world could give you. And yet at the same time, that can all be given to you when you're that thing, but it doesn't matter to you anymore. Like that really is the key to the whole thing, is that like none of that shit even matters. And that's why you can have it, not have it, whatever. It's regardless and irrelevant to, I guess, your joy, I guess, in living.
Well, to me, there's one thing about this that you pointed out at the end. The more you want something and the more you need it, the more unlikely that you'll be able to get it. And this comes down to, you can put this parallel to just about anything. You want to be famous? You really badly want to be famous? You probably never will. You just never will, because the thing is that the neediness will always make you choke right before the finish line, if you even get that close. And it goes for relationships. If you need it, if you have to have it to be complete, you'll never get it. It'll never be yours. You'll always be just at least a fraction away, and the closer you get, the worse it'll be, the more frustrating it'll be, the more painful it will become. And so in some ways, you get what you want partly because you don't want it. You don't need it. And it's kind of a mind bender for a lot of people, because the thing is that they go, well, if I don't want it, then like maybe I won't go for it. And this is a big psychological mind bender, is that we're scared to be detached because we're attached to being attached. And some of this is about detachment. Like this is not even interpretation. This is just obviously clearly about don't be attached to triumph. Don't be attached to being a big deal or your winnings or, all of these things that he's talking about. Your virtue, your wisdom, whatever it is, right? Yeah. Because the thing is the more that you need to be those things, the more inevitable is that you will not be. You will be, and sometimes you will end up being the opposite of it. And the interesting thing is that you're talking about at the end, right? So the earth is yours and everything in it. If you want the earth and everything in it, you'll never have it. And that's, I think you raised a really good point, is that you become this kind of person that can have the earth and everything in it. And because you're the kind of person that can have it all, you know not to take it. And that's where you talk about dictators and tyrants and all that stuff. Those are the types of people that try to take it. Tyrants always lose. Throughout history, always. They might have a reign for a while, but they always end in demise some way or another. It's just how it works, because the abuse of power ultimately rots itself from the core. But another thing, when this was written, I don't remember the year or know the year in which it was written, but he says, "Then you'll be a man, my son." The thing about that saying is that I don't think you need to take that so literally. What that meant at the time in context, this is something I've been studying a lot in storytelling, because I've been going back and I've been studying great stories and all this stuff. And one of my journeys into studying storytelling in depth was what were the cultural circumstances that were going on at the time in which this was written. If you look at all great works, all Oscar-winning movies, all the great stuff we reference, it's usually partly poignant because of what was going on at the time. And if you become aware of that, you can begin to understand more in context why this was so profound and such an important story at the time. And also, if the story becomes timeless, meaning that it goes beyond transcendent of that culture and time, that we can see that there are transcendent lessons that even bypass that cultural connection, which I think this does. You'll be a man. To be a man back when this was written meant you earn being a man. It was nothing to do with biology. It had nothing to do with any of that stuff. It was about, you don't call yourself a man. You become a man, and you become bestowed as now you are a man. Like you've earned what people consider a man, right? So it's not about even male or female. It's about earning a kind of thing where you're the kind of person that we can classify as this. So I think in some ways what the poem is saying is this is how you earn what is a prized thing. We're in a weird time. I mean, because we're in a very immature time right now where people are kind of trying to recalibrate and work some things out. And there is a lot of attack on men and stuff like that, and just manhood and masculinity. And it's all bullshit, 90% of it, because it's just children who are getting on social media who are basically like, I just want to get views. It's fucking nonsense. But the thing is that if you look at the core of what manhood really is, it's like, I'm solid, I'm accountable, I'm going to protect, I'm reliable, I'm there for you, I'm going to support, I'm not going to let my emotions get in the way of the business that needs to be done. I'm going to stay consistent, even keel level. I'm not, if something goes wrong, I will right the ship. I will be okay. You're going to be okay. You can feel safe. And we want men in our lives because that, and I'm not talking about men in the sexual gender term. I'm talking about men. Like a woman could be a man in this context. It doesn't really matter. The point is that I want people around me who got my fucking back, who, if they're in charge of the ship, I know they got the ship. They're not going to let us sink in the middle of the sea, that we're going to make it on our voyage, that we're not going to starve to death. We're going to make it through this, whatever hardship we go through. That's what a man is. And so when it's talking about you'll be a man, you're going to be the kind of person that people will look to as a leader, as a reliable person in which they can feel safe and they can flourish. And I think a lot of what this poem ultimately leads to is that. And don't you want to be that? You know what I mean? And that means that you're going to have to, like, if you go through, and I'll go back to our original conversation, if you go through disaster and you go, oh my God, I'm in disaster, my life's so hard, whiny little wimp, you're not a man, right? A man needs to meet disaster and still be steadfast, still be strong, still hold their head. And that's what we want. And the thing is that's what we need. That's what we admire. Down at the core of all of us, I know this to be true. This is not it has nothing to do with anything. That's what we need. That's what a child needs in a parent. That's what you also need in your lover a lot of the time, your partner, your best friends. That's what you need in your teammates when you're playing sports. You referenced sports earlier. That's what we need. We need people that are not going to fucking melt down when shit gets tough. And so I think a lot of what this is getting into for me, I guess we are getting to that witching hour again, but I'll pass it on to you. Is that can we become the kind of person that can face the storm and still be left standing when it's past? Because it will pass, and what will be left is you. But are you going to get washed away with the storm because you just give into it? And I think a lot of what this poem is saying, if you can withstand the storm, metaphorically, yeah, you're going to be left standing and the storm will pass, and then you can have everything in the world, because those who aren't left standing will not have what's left in the world. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay, hold on. I'm going to pass it to you. I just want to mention the beer again. I gave a big spiel on it last episode, so if you really care, you can pay attention to that one. But Big Bear Brewery from Kelowna, BC. This is their lager. It's got a cool little bear image on the front of the can. It's a tasty beer. I liked it. Evan liked it. I'm sure he's going to say the same thing again if I just pass it over to him. So let's wrap this baby up. We had a good talk. What are your final thoughts, Evan?
Yeah, beer was great. Just to continue off. Yeah, just picking up sort of where you left things off, and something that more so in the last episode we were talking about, but this whole thing of, like you'll be a real person, like you'll be a real human being. And you're talking about the storm, and it's an interesting way of looking at a lot of the things that he's saying in this, because it's not necessarily just like, oh yes, this onslaught from the world, right? Because some of it's actually within. A lot of the things that he's talking about in this poem are things that are from within, right? Like the whole thing of that we were talking about. We spent a lot of time talking about your dreams, your thoughts, right? And the last one we're talking about triumph and disaster. Like these are all storms of the internal variety, right? These are not like necessarily imposed upon from the world, but even though he refers to those things, right? Not like people are going to lie, people are going to hate. It's like, don't deal in lies, don't give in to hatred. People, the other part, it was one we didn't talk about too much, but we mentioned, it's like people will twist your truth. Like if you can, what is that again? It's like, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. I mean, man, like how much does that happen today, where, people are, good people are acting in good faith in the world, trying to have important conversations or whatever it is, trying to do something positive, and people are just taking what they say out of context, out of whatever, trying to twist people out of to their own advantage, right? Lots of people just doing it because it's like, oh, if I trash this person, if I rake this person through the coals, it's going to bring a lot of attention to me, right? There's a lot of that kind of shit that, like, this is exactly, like, I don't know when he wrote this, but like it's just like, man, like this is just, these things are perennial. These the wisdom that's in so much of this, right? This stuff has been going, like, none of this stuff is new, right? It's just that we have the capacity to do it at such a level now that's beyond. Oh, do we have it there? 1943. This was written. Perfect. So, there's all of these traps, there's all of these storms, internal, external, and just this, again, this challenge, and something that's asking us to like look at how we respond. How do we respond to the things going on in the world, as well as the whims and desires of the ego that are private to us, right? And there is a kind of direction that he at least sort of points to, even though it's extraordinarily difficult. A lot of the things that's being asked, it's hard. It's hard to have people around you saying bad things about you. It's hard to deal with when bad things happen, when we lose big, in a certain respect, right? These are not easy things to do. But part of learning how we do that, and where it asks us to place our attention instead, that's like, it's pretty profound. It's a pretty profound vision that he's kind of laying out there. And I mean, I don't know. I've enjoyed going into this one. I'll probably be reading this poem a few more times and just chewing on it. But yeah, I think that this is one that, and if you've made it this far, be great to know what kind of jumps out to you in this poem. What are the things, and spend some time with it. And because I think that this also helps provoke, this is the last thing I'll say. To me, this poem, part of what's so incredible about it is that it provokes our own inner wisdom to come through and speak to us and discover the meaning of these words and how it relates to the particulars of our own life, right? Listening to that thing, because that's so much of what he's actually ultimately, I think, trying to guide you to, is like, listen to that inner knower, connect to that inner knower, because that thing is the thing that can do all of these things that I'm saying.
Well, I really like the way you wrapped it up there, and I'm going to keep it sweet and short and sweet. So the first time I heard this poem, I'll share a little story. I'm glad you brought it up today, because, and that we explored this like we did. But the first time I heard this poem, I was about 14 or 15. And my parents were going through a divorce. And up till that point, like, we were doing quite well, at least as far as I could tell as a kid. We had like a mansion, and we had all these nice cars and boats and all this great stuff, and we lost everything. And, I went from living in a mansion to living in a trailer park. It was like literally riches to rags, like to like such a massive degree. And my dad and I were driving along the highway there, and I remember he read this poem to me, and that was the first time I ever heard it, and it really was very poignant, and it stood out to me. And I know that a lot of these things he was trying to work through at the same time, I think all of us were, but this one line, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. That line stood out to me because I think when you have a devastating loss, when it's devastating, it is like you gave your whole life to it. And now you think, I think one of the things that I realized through that, and I went through kind of this in my 30s. I had built up my life to a certain way in my early 30s, and then everything that I kind of built, it all just kind of deteriorated. It was all just kind of almost like I was repeating a pattern. It was almost like playing out again. And I remember as a kid, thinking that I was learning something and that I could avoid that and dodge that experience. And yet here I am living it again. And, I talked a little bit about, like, I went through a spiritual awakening and kind of a depression through that. The thing is that when you're at that point, you are watching everything in your life, broken, right? You're watching it everything you gave your life to. You're just watching it all just get destroyed. And you're like, well, what am I? I'm nothing with this. I spent my whole life to build this. And then the thought of building it again, you know, the tools, they feel worn out. They feel broken. And the thing is, I can tell you this, as time passes, you begin to identify less with what got broken. Like, that used to be me. Now that was just a part of my journey. And the thing is that's an interesting thing about time and about going along on this journey, is that the most devastating moment in your life at that moment is the most devastating thing you're experiencing. But given some time, it's just a hurdle in your journey that in context, in relation to that, is really not as big of a thing. And in actuality, given more time, it actually, you begin to look at it different and associate with it different and realize that it might have actually not been as much of a disaster as you had experienced in the moment or thought it was in the moment. So yeah, I don't know if you have any other final thoughts, Evan. You seem almost like you're on the edge of your seat ready to say something. I'm going to pass it to you. You close this up.
Oh God, no, I was just, you know, it's funny because I hadn't necessarily given much thought to that last thing that you brought in from here. It's like, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. And I'm just like, oh shit. Oh, that's so good too. Like to stoop, like everything's broken and then stoop, like just like, okay, that happened, and get back to it. And not only get back to it, but doing it with worn out tools. Like, and it's incredible. You know, like it's quite a picture being painted, and a beautiful and lofty, and you know, this is just such an extraordinary poem. And it's even that the more that we talk about it and dive into it, the more amazed I am by it, because of how much it gives the reader and how much it withholds, right? Like, it's, to me, that's one of the true hallmarks of wisdom, and I think why we do these artist wisdom series. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.